Yo, what's up? Welcome to episode 179 of Are You Being Real? I'm Mark Shapiro, and today I'm going to share with you the top 5 self-development books that I've read. And I am definitely a huge self-help dork. I read probably 2 to 3 books a month. Some of them are for prepping for interviews that I have on the show. Others are just on topics that I'm curious about that I think will be helpful for me, whether in terms of my personal growth or professional growth. So I'm just a huge sponge. I love to read. And in 179 episodes of this show, I've never done an episode where I share some of my favorite books and some of the key learnings that I've taken away from those books. So I figured today I would share with you the top 5 kind of transformational self-development books that I've read, as well as a few takeaways from each. So whether you've read any of these books before, it might be a nice refresher on them. I think some of these lessons and some of this wisdom we can't hear enough times. Or perhaps you haven't read one of these books. Maybe it'll pique your interest in that. So that's what we got for you today. And we're going to have this whole list on the show notes page, which is areyoubeingreel.com/179. In addition to some other picks, I'm just going to spend today's show on the 5 books that I think are really just the most impactful, transformational, accessible. And then there'll be some more kind of specialized books that I've read and loved that will be listed out on the show notes page if you want to take a deeper dive there. So let's get started here. And just to kind of give you a little bit more context here, I like to read my books on a mix of different mediums. So I know everyone's got kind of their own mediums. Some people like to hold the hardcover book. Other people like to have them on a Kindle, just you don't have to carry as much weight if you're traveling. Some people like Audible, so they can listen to books and have that kind of audio experience. For me, I like a little bit of each. If I'm sitting at home, I prefer to have a hardcover book that I can hold in my hands. And if I'm traveling, I like to have a Kindle. And if I'm in my car, I like to use Audible. So that's kind of me. But let's start out. The first book that I want to share about is The 4 Agreements. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the best self-development book of all time, but it's essentially 4 rules to live your life by. And they're so simple and really valuable. So The 4 Agreements is a fantastic book. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz, and it's one of my favorites. So I'm going to quickly walk you through the 4 agreements. The first one is be impeccable with your word, which really means to speak with integrity and to really only say what you mean. So what I take by that is being kind to both myself and the language that I speak to myself. So I'm not being just absolutely cruel to myself, together with being open and honest in my dialogue with others. And if I make plans with someone, that I will honor those plans and I won't flake out on someone, or I won't show up 20 minutes late to an appointment. And if I, for some reason, have something that pops up, I'll do my best to let someone know, like, hey, my new ETA is now at 10:20 versus 10 o'clock. And I'll send that before 10 o'clock. So I'm not actually blowing them off and they're like already at the restaurant waiting for me. I like to give them a little bit of a heads up so maybe they can plan accordingly and not waste more of their time. So being impeccable with your word really encompasses those things and more. And the true value with being your word is that not only does it help you build a stronger relationship with yourself because you're maybe not being super cruel to yourself, and when you're consistently being your word to other people, then you can be proud of yourself. You can feel like I'm someone that when I say something, it matters. I'm going to hold true to it. I'm going to be in integrity with that. And when we're our word, then we can basically use that as a great way and a foundation to build confidence. Now, obviously, when we are being impeccable with our word with somebody else, then we're going to be much more trustworthy. I know for me personally, the last thing I want to do is be friends with people that are major flakes, that are consistently either non-committal or they're pushing back plans or they're super slow to respond maybe and are wasting my time. So being impeccable with your word, it's easier said than done, but I think it's a great thing to practice to both really harvest your relationship with yourself and others. The second of the 4 agreements is don't take anything personally, which as a human, it's a very challenging thing. So what happens when we take things personally? Usually it's in regards to some sort of interpersonal experience that we're having. Maybe somebody else tells us something that we don't want to hear, or maybe we're with someone that's like really scared and we start taking on their energy, or maybe we take on what they're saying to us as a personal attack. And what happens when we take things personally is we give our power away. And when we're constantly giving our power away to others, that's just a great way to get absolutely lost in our emotions. So what the 4 agreements says in terms of don't take anything personally, what Don Miguel Ruiz means by that is when someone tells you something that maybe you don't want to hear, that it really has nothing to do with you and all about the person that is delivering the message, because everything they're saying to you is a direct result of where they are in that moment. So let's say you're hanging out with your boyfriend and they're in a really terrible mood, and then they maybe give you a piece of criticism or feedback. It really might not be about the actual criticism or feedback, but it's like they're already in a bad mood and they're saying something to you. And if you take it too personally, guess what's probably going to happen? You're going to get into a really bad mood. So if you're not taking things personally, if you're taking things in stride, realizing that people are just projecting things, that you can continue to stand firm in your power and be less swayed and pushed around by other people. And I know as someone that really enjoys being liked, that not taking things personally and being okay with setting boundaries and saying no, that it's a really empowering thing for me and something that I'm definitely committed to working on. So the second one is not to take things personally. Number 3 is don't make assumptions. So when we're making up assumptions, when we're kind of jumping to conclusions with a limited amount of information and we're maybe just going off something we sense, then it's very easy to spend time and energy making up stories. So for example, somebody sends you a text, and a text could just be one single line of text that who knows what context it's in, who knows where that person is coming from when they sent that text. Maybe it's a compliment, maybe it's passive aggressive. We really don't know. But if we make an assumption, let's say that a friend is mad at us when the text message actually had no kind of heated motive at all. If we're sitting there upset about the way that our friend communicated with us and maybe it ruins our night, and then we find out the next day that like we totally took it out of context, then why did we waste so much time and energy making an assumption? So I think this is a very valuable one. I mean, naturally, as intuitive, smart, logical beings who have been through so many experiences in our lives, we naturally are smart. So we jump to conclusions, we kind of fill out more of the picture when in a lot of instances we're just making stuff up. So I think it's really important to not make things up or to be aware of when we are making assumptions versus when we really are going based off of the objective knowledge that somebody else gives us. So a couple of great ways to not make assumptions are to ask great questions to other people so we can get more of an understanding of their situation and their motive and their mood in terms of delivering any kind of information to us, together with being really clear with our wants and needs. I know something that I sometimes struggle with is I might need support. And let's say a good friend of mine has a connection to somebody that I want to have on the podcast. And I don't reach out to my friend because I'm nervous that like I'm asking for too much or that I'm being a burden and that they're going to say no. Well, that is totally an assumption based off of my own shit. So if I go from that place of an assumption, well, I'm definitely not going to have that person on my podcast. But if I let them know, hey, I know you're friends with so-and-so, and I think they'd be really an awesome guest on my podcast, would you be open to making an introduction? And then they can tell me yes or no. And if maybe they say no, I can ask them, well, what would you need to see from me or the show in order to make the introduction? So with that, I actually have the information instead of just choosing defeat and making an assumption that might be completely untrue. And then the fourth agreement is always do your best. And that one is self-explanatory. It's about being consistent, putting your best foot forward, standing for what you believe in. And when we're doing our best at the end of the day, regardless of some of the results that are out of our control, if we did our best, we can know that we put it all out there and can be happy and proud of ourselves at the end of the day. So those are the 4 agreements. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's a great book. I know they're pretty simple rules, but I know when I personally practice those consistently, they really, really help me out tremendously in my life. So I'd say that's the most accessible one. Feel free to read that one. The second book that I wanted to share with you is The Artist's Way. And in my opinion, The Artist's Way is the best book out there on creativity and getting past creative blocks, getting past fear, getting past resistance. I know it's called The Artist's Way, but it's really so much more than that. And to me, it's really one of the most transformational books that I have ever read. So don't be dissuaded by the title if you don't consider yourself to be a creative type. When I sat down and I read The Artist's Way, first, I didn't consider myself to be an artist. And second, I didn't really know if I was creative. But I think one of the most valuable lessons that I learned in The Artist's Way is that we really are all inner artists and we just bottle it up. And I know for me personally, I didn't consider myself to be an artist because I'm not a good painter. I'm not particularly good at drawing. I don't write music. And so I didn't really consider myself to be an artist. But when we look at the word creativity, the base root of that is to create. So anytime we create anything, maybe we even create plans for a night, that's still being creative in the way that we're spending our night. So when we look at ourselves as creative beings, it opens up more opportunity and possibility for creativity in our lives. So that was a really important message for me. And one of the things that I love in The Artist's Way is that we all are artists, but oftentimes we bottle it up. So Julie Cameron, the writer of the book, says that she basically, this whole book is, it's an amazing guidebook. I believe it's about a 12-week experience if you want to do every single exercise in the book, which a lot of people do. I personally haven't done all the exercises, but it really helps you work through those creative blocks so your creativity runs through you. So if you've ever heard someone say that they are channeling or they're channeling their creativity or they wanted to write a book and the book just flowed through them, a lot of that is because they are working through their resistance. And because they're working through their resistance, the creativity is able to flow through them. And Julie Cameron has a great example in the book where she says, a gardener doesn't create a plant. A gardener plants a seed and then takes good care of it, hoping that one day it'll bloom and turn into a beautiful big plant. So essentially, we are like the gardener. So as long as we're taking care of ourselves, we're nurturing our creativity, we'll allow it to flow through us. Now, with The Artist's Way, the first thing, whenever I hear people talking about The Artist's Way, is the morning pages, which is essentially a morning journal prompt where Julie Cameron in the book encourages the reader to every single day when you wake up to journal for about 15 minutes, to write out just a couple of pages, 1 or 2 pages, writing out absolutely everything that's on your mind. So if you're like me and you wake up in the morning and maybe feel some fear, which is totally natural, most of us do as human beings after being offline for so many hours, and we wake up and we're like, are we safe? Is everything under control? So it's pretty cool. You can actually work through some of that fear, some of that resistance, anything that you're feeling in the morning. And as you're working through it on the page, you're letting it go, which will hopefully fuel more creativity and more internal peace throughout the day. 2 more quick notes from The Artist's Way. Julie Cameron says that creativity is everywhere. And I love having permission to see it that way, that anywhere I look, I can see creativity or I can find creative inspiration. I can go outside my house and I can see a bird up in my tree, and I can make up whatever story I want about that bird and the tree and let my mind go wherever. And I'm using that creativity to go wherever my mind takes me. So I really like that permission to see creativity everywhere, because when I look at the world through that lens, there's just so much more possibility that comes with it. And it's a lot of fun too. And then the last thing that I wanted to share about The Artist's Way is that Julie Cameron says that boredom is bullshit. And that boredom is kind of just an excuse to be apathetic and to be resistant versus tapping into that creativity, tapping into the flow, and truly living. So that is the second book that I wanted to share, The Artist's Way. Like I said, I haven't done all the activities in the book, but it still has been such a powerful book in my life. And I read so many self-development books, and I have to say the morning pages is the most popular exercise in any book that I've ever experienced or ever even heard of. It is so many people do the morning pages and find so much benefit in it. So even if you don't read the book, perhaps you could still try out the morning pages, just writing a couple of pages every day when you wake up, just letting your thoughts, your feelings flow onto a page, and to see how that impacts your life. The third book that I wanted to share about is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's an amazing book. And essentially the thesis of the book is that life is now, and that every minute of our lives that we spend worrying about our future or regretting the past is a moment lost, because all there really is what's happening right now. And as I think this is like an old ancient wisdom by Lao Tzu, said that if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And if you're at peace, you're living in the present. So that really is really at the core of The Power of Now. And Eckhart Tolle shares all sorts of great tips as to how to really step into the now, which, as Eckhart Tolle really describes, it's accepting the present moment. I know oftentimes we're not completely satisfied with the things that are happening in our lives. Sometimes things are out of our control. Maybe it's raining on your wedding day, but being pissed about it is not going to change the fact that it's raining. So if you want to experience peace, then it's stepping into the present moment, accepting the present moment, and really allowing ourselves the freedom from the suffering that is tied to, as Lao Tzu said, being upset and regretting the past, or being anxious about the future. So anytime you feel anxiety, it's a great opportunity to take some deep breaths, to really take in your surrounding around you, and to embrace all that's available to you right there in the present moment. So that's The Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle is a masterful teacher. I love all of his books. So if you haven't read The Power of Now, I highly recommend it. One more thing from The Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle says that time isn't actually precious at all. I know that a lot of times we think about time being so precious. It's our really only limited resource. But Eckhart Tolle says that time is actually an illusion. What he says is what you perceive as precious is not time, but the one point that is out of time, the now. So he says the more you're focused on time, the past and the future, the more you're actually missing out on what's happening right now, which is the most precious thing there is. So even thinking about time is taking us out of the present moment. So I know that's a little bit of a mind twist, but the more present, the more we can be focused on our breath or remember to breathe, then the more present we're going to be. And that's where freedom from suffering, depression, anxiety lives. So if you experience anxiety, definitely check out The Power of Now. The fourth book that I wanted to share about that's been really highly impactful for me is The One Thing. To me, it is the best book out there on productivity and organization and really improving your performance and getting things done. So if you want to have less clutter in your life, if you got some distractions, you're feeling stressed, and you want more focus and energy and success, then The One Thing might be for you. And the one thing is exactly probably what you think it is. What is the one thing that you can do? And by doing that, it'll make everything else either easier or unnecessary. And what I love about the one thing, this concept, is you can apply it to absolutely any area of your life. So you can apply it to a professional goal. You can apply it to your health, to your love life, to your social life. So let's look at some sort of professional goal that you have. So if you want to launch a business, what is the one thing that you can do that would be the absolute smartest thing you could do that would put you in the best position to building a business? Maybe it is getting a mentor from someone who's already built that type of business. Maybe it's doing so much research to see what's already out there, but really focusing on that one thing. And when we look at that one thing, it's really easy to be able to see what are all the things that aren't the one thing. And if something isn't the one thing, then is it really worth our time to do? So that same concept and principle can really be applied to anything and can really create an amazing domino effect in our life. But if you're looking at your health, what's the one thing that you can do that will set you up to live a more healthy life? So maybe it's cutting out Mountain Dew or some sort of junk food, or maybe it's going to a doctor to check out something. And the same thing goes to what can make you a better lover. What's the one smartest thing you can do? Maybe it's allocating one day a week to have a formal check-in with your partner where you can have an open conversation as to, if you're getting your needs met in the relationship, or if there's anything that's been bothering you that's come up in the last week. Maybe that's the one thing. Or maybe who's the person that you really want to build a friendship with? Who's that one person? So it really can really transcend. It's so simple, and I really love it. The book is loaded with all sorts of productivity tips. In the book, they'll tell you why multitasking is total bullshit, because when our mind is jumping back and forth between so many things, we can't really focus, and it takes way more energy to jump back and forth between things, so it actually depletes our energy a lot more. The book goes into managing our time in the most impactful way, really being able to identify when our most energetic and peak performance windows are during a day, and then really protecting those windows. So we're spending that exact peak performance time on that one thing that we feel like we need to do during the day that's going to be the most important thing, versus scheduling a call or a meeting during that time and then utilizing that precious, huge boost of energy on something that could easily be something that you did after lunch when you're tired or getting back into the groove. The book also talks about the 80-20 rule, which I think we've all heard about. It's one of the pillars in Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek, but it is essentially that 80% of our results are based on 20% of our efforts. And living in this kind of productivity-based society, when we feel like we need to stay busy and we need to work 8-9 hours a day, we're often spending 80% of our time on things that are really not driving the results. When, if you look at it on the flip side, if we were just to focus on the things that are really going to drive results, then that might take up 20% of our time, but drive 80% of our business or the results that we're looking for. So the 80-20 rule, you probably know it, but great examples in the book. So definitely recommend The One Thing if you feel like you could take your productivity, your organization, your time management to the next level. And The One Thing is essentially the Bible that I've used for my Winning Weeks 8-week accountability program. The fifth and final book that I wanted to share with you today is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this book came up on last week's episode with Tommy Sobel because he said of all the books he's read in the last year, How to Win Friends and Influence People was at the top of the list. And I'm definitely a big fan of that book. And the amazing thing about it is it was written, I think, like 67 years ago, but it is an absolute classic. And to me, it is the best book available today on interpersonal relationships. The name really says it all. But the book gives techniques in how to deal with other people. It gives you tangible tips. Don't criticize, don't condemn, don't be a complainer. Give honest and sincere appreciation, because we all love to be appreciated. Really speak to the other person's wants and interests over our own. And I know that can be a really, really challenging thing, but it is the way that we can provide the most value to others, is when we're speaking specifically to others' wants and needs. That's the best way that we can serve and provide value. The book also shares 6 ways to make people like you. And I think we all would like to be liked, and they're actually super simple. So simply showing an interest in somebody else and asking questions, that is a great way to get someone else to like you, to show curiosity. Maybe before you start talking about yourself and what you're up to, you can ask them, what are you passionate about? What's your dream? A second thing, which is so incredibly simple, is by simply smiling, remembering a person's name and continuing to bring it up, being a great listener, and then making sure the other person feels important, and doing that in a sincere fashion. So the book is really loaded with great tips and is really like a timeless classic. And we're social animals living in a social society, and some of this stuff is just not taught in schools. So How to Win Friends and Influence People is a great book if you want to really beef up your interpersonal skills. So that is my top 5 in no specific order. We had number 1, The 4 Agreements. We had number 2, The Artist's Way. Number 3, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Number 4, The One Thing. And then number 5, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So if any of those books resonated with you or piqued your interest, definitely check them out. Highest recommendations for all of those. But those are just a few of my favorite books. It was really tough to just zero in on 5, but I thought those would be 5 great ones to start with. But I've got a list of a ton of other of my favorite books, the books that I feel like I've learned the most from, the most spiritual and faith-inducing books I've read, books on sales, books on building businesses, books on manifestation, books on really changing your relationship with money. So for more on that, we've got a whole list of book recommendations for you at areyoubeingreel.com/179.